Flights are $1,150 each for the trip, my wife said. If you cannot afford it, stay behind. I nodded, then got an alert. My credit card had been used for 4 business class tickets, not mine. I opened my app, hit dispute all, locked the account. My wife and her sisters showed up at my door. I did not. You know that moment when someone says something so casually cruel that it feels like they've just slapped you across the face with a wet towel? Yeah, that was my Tuesday morning at 7:23 a.m., standing in my own damn kitchen, still wearing scrubs that reeked of disinfectant and exhaustion. I'd just walked through the front door after pulling a brutal 13-hour shift at St. Mary's Emergency Department. My feet were killing me, my back was screaming, and my head felt like someone had been using it as a pinball machine all night long. The usual chaos. Cardiac arrests, overdoses, a guy who somehow managed to superglue his hand to his forehead during what he called a YouTube experiment. You know, just another beautiful night, saving lives while getting yelled at by drunk college kids, and dealing with insurance companies that act like covering basic medical care is some kind of personal favor. All I wanted was to grab a cup of coffee, maybe some toast, and collapse on the couch for a few hours before I had to be back at the hospital. Simple stuff, right? Wrong. Melina was standing by the kitchen island, looking like she'd just stepped out of some wellness magazine photo shoot. Perfect blonde hair pulled back in one of those effortless buns that probably took 20 minutes to achieve, wearing her favorite athleisure set that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. She had that green smoothie in her hand, the one with kale, spirulina, and whatever other expensive superfood powder she'd ordered online that week. I mumbled a good morning and headed straight for the coffee maker, already fantasizing about that first sip of caffeine hitting my bloodstream. That's when she dropped the bomb. Flights are $1,150 each for the trip, she said, not even looking up from her phone. Her tone was so matter-of-fact, like she was reading me the weather forecast. If you can't afford it, stay behind. I froze with the coffee mug halfway to my lips. Did she really just say that? To me? The guy who'd been busting his ass for the past 3 years to keep our heads above water while she pursued her wellness coaching certification and spent her days posting inspirational quotes on Instagram. The trip. Right. The girls' getaway to Santorini that she'd been planning with her sisters Ivana and Sasha, plus their friend Reina. A ladies' reset week, she called it. 7 days of pristine beaches, overpriced cocktails, and Instagram photo opportunities while I stayed home and worked double shifts to pay for it all. I should have said something. Should have called her out right there and then. Should have reminded her that I'd been covering her portion of the mortgage for the past 6 months while she found herself through expensive yoga retreats and life coaching seminars. Should have mentioned that just last week, I'd quietly transferred money into her account so she could buy that ridiculous $300 skincare set she claimed was essential for her brand. But I didn't. Instead, I did what I always did. I nodded and pretended it didn't hurt. I took that verbal gut punch like it was just another part of our morning routine, right between brushing teeth and checking the mail. Yeah, okay, I heard myself saying, my voice sounding weird and distant. You guys have fun. The thing is, I was used to it by then. Used to the passive-aggressive comments wrapped up in fake concern. Used to being treated like a walking ATM with feelings that didn't really matter. Used to being the responsible one, who always made sacrifices so everyone else could live their best life. Melina went back to scrolling through her phone, probably looking at resort reviews or planning her vacation wardrobe. She didn't thank me. Didn't acknowledge that I'd just agreed to fund another one of her adventures while staying behind to work. It was just expected, like gravity or the sunrise. I sat down at the kitchen table with my coffee, trying to process what had just happened. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional ding from Melina's phone notifications. Outside, I could hear our neighbor Mr. Peterson starting up his lawnmower, getting an early jump on his yard work. That's when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, probably just another work email or some spam notification. But something made me glance at the screen. It was from my credit card app, a purchase alert. My stomach dropped as I read the notification. For business class tickets to Athens, Greece. Departure date, next Friday. Total charge, $4,600. I stared at the screen, my brain trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The names on the reservation were right there in black and white. Melina M., Ivana R., Sasha R., Reina L. Not only had they booked the trip, they'd upgraded themselves to business class and charged it all to my card. The same card I'd given Melina for emergencies only about 2 years ago and somehow never got back. I looked up at my wife, who was still scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd just discovered their little spending spree. She was probably looking at pictures of the hotel they'd be staying at, paid for with money I hadn't agreed to spend. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like clarity, like I'd been walking around in a fog for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to see clearly. All those times I'd covered for her family. All those emergencies that somehow always involved me opening my wallet. All those moments when I'd been made to feel like I was being unreasonable for wanting basic respect in my own marriage. It was like watching the final piece of a jigsaw puzzle fall into place, revealing a picture I'd been too close to see before. I was done being their safety net. Done being taken for granted. Done pretending that this was what love looked like. But first, I had some calls to make. You know that feeling when your whole world tilts sideways and suddenly nothing makes sense anymore? That's exactly what happened when I opened that credit card notification. My hands were actually shaking as I stared at my phone screen, reading those numbers over and over again like maybe they'd magically change if I blinked hard enough. $4,600. Gone. Just like that. I clicked into the full transaction details, hoping, praying, that maybe there was some mistake. Maybe it was fraud. Maybe some scammer had gotten hold of my card information and decided to book themselves a nice Greek vacation on my dime. But no, there it was in crystal clear digital print, for business class tickets to Athens, departing Friday morning. And those names weren't random strangers. They were the 4 women who were supposed to be figuring out how to afford this trip themselves. Melina was still standing there in the kitchen, humming some tune while she finished her smoothie, completely oblivious to the financial bomb that had just exploded in my lap. Part of me wanted to march over there and shove the phone in her face, demand an explanation, maybe even lose my shit completely. But another part of me, the part that was suddenly seeing everything with brutal clarity, wanted to see just how far this would go. I took a deep breath and opened the credit card app properly. The interface loaded slowly, probably because my hands were trembling so bad I could barely hold the phone steady. When it finally came up, I went straight to the dispute section. For clicks, and I'd flagged all 4 transactions as unauthorized. Another 2 clicks, and I'd temporarily locked the entire account. The whole process took maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like I was defusing a bomb. Each tap on the screen was deliberate, calculated. This wasn't some heat-of-the-moment decision. This was me finally taking control of a situation that had been spiraling out of my hands for way too long. As soon as I hit that final confirm button, something shifted inside me. It was like I'd been holding my breath underwater for years and suddenly broke the surface. The relief was so intense, it was almost physical. I looked up at Melina, who was now wiping down the already spotless granite countertop with one of those expensive microfiber cloths she'd ordered in bulk from some Instagram ad. She was wearing this little satisfied smile, probably already mentally planning her vacation outfits or imagining the envy-inducing photos she'd post from some cliffside restaurant overlooking the Aegean Sea. That's when it all started flooding back, every single time I'd been played for a sucker by this family. It wasn't just this trip. This was just the latest in a long line of financial hits I'd taken while pretending everything was fine. Like when Sasha's boyfriend dumped her last spring, and suddenly, she couldn't make rent on her overpriced downtown apartment. Who got the tearful phone call at midnight? Me. Who transferred $800 the next morning without even asking questions. Also me. Did I ever see that money again? What do you think? Or how about when Melina's dad Arturo needed that emergency dental work after putting off a root canal for 2 years because he didn't want to deal with insurance paperwork? $3,000, gone overnight. It's family, Melina had said when I hesitated for about 2 seconds. We take care of family. Funny how that philosophy only seemed to apply when my wallet was involved. And don't even get me started on last year's Bahamas vacation. The one where I worked extra shifts for 2 months straight to cover everyone's expenses because it was Ivana's 30th birthday, and we couldn't let her celebrate alone. I spent that entire week answering work emails from the hotel business center while they lounged on the beach with drinks that cost more per sip than most people make in an hour. Every single time, I told myself I was being generous. Told myself this was what love looked like. Sacrificing for the people you care about, being the rock they could count on when things got tough. I actually felt good about it, like I was proving what kind of man I was. Responsible Julian. Dependable Julian. Julian, who always comes through in a pinch. What a fucking joke. I wasn't generous. I was convenient. I wasn't dependable. I was exploitable. And the worst part? They all knew it. Every single one of them knew exactly which buttons to push to get me to open my wallet. The fake emergencies, the guilt trips, the casual mentions of financial stress right before asking for just a small favor. I was their personal ATM, and I'd been so desperate to feel needed, so afraid of being seen as selfish or cheap, that I'd let them drain me dry while convincing myself it was love. My phone was still buzzing with notifications, probably work-related stuff that I'd have to deal with eventually. But right now, I had more pressing matters to handle. I needed to get out of this house before I said something I couldn't take back. Or maybe something I should have said years ago. I stood up from the kitchen table, legs a little unsteady, and headed toward the bedroom. Melina glanced up as I passed. "Where are you going?" she asked, that fake casual tone she used when she was fishing for information. "Out," I said without stopping. "Out where?" "You just got home." I paused at the bedroom doorway and looked back at her. She was still holding that microfiber cloth, her perfect eyebrows raised in what she probably thought was innocent curiosity. But I could see something else in her expression now, the slightest hint of worry, like maybe she sensed that something had shifted. "Somewhere with better cell service," I said. "I need to make some calls." And for the first time in our entire relationship, I walked away without explaining myself further. The drive up to Lake Harmony was exactly what I needed. 3 hours of winding mountain roads, classic rock on the radio, and absolutely zero cell service for the first 2 hours. I'd found this little cabin rental online about 6 months ago during one of those late night "what if I just disappeared" Google searches that every overworked, underappreciated husband has probably done at least once. Back then, I'd bookmarked it as a fantasy. Today, it was my lifeline. The cabin was perfect in its simplicity: 2 rooms, a fireplace, and a porch that overlooked the water. No Wi-Fi, no cable, just peace and quiet, and the kind of silence that lets you actually hear yourself think for once. I threw my hastily packed duffel bag on the bed and cracked open a beer from the mini fridge, settling into one of those old wooden Adirondack chairs on the porch. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe properly. My phone had been buzzing intermittently during the drive up, but I'd ignored it completely. Now, sitting here with the late afternoon sun reflecting off the lake, I finally pulled it out to see what kind of chaos had erupted back home. 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, and 1 notification that made me smile wider than I had in ages. My credit card company confirming that the disputed charges had been temporarily reversed while they investigated. The text messages were a beautiful progression of panic, starting with confusion and escalating to full-blown meltdown mode. I scrolled through them like I was reading the world's most satisfying novel. "Melina, 2:47 p.m. Where did you go? Your car's gone." Melina, 3:15 p.m. "Julian, this isn't funny. Call me back." Then things got interesting around 4:30, right about when they would have been standing in line at the airport check-in counter. "Ivana, for 32 p.m. Why isn't anything paid for? We're at the counter, and they're saying the tickets were disputed." I actually laughed out loud reading that one. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. They'd charged 4 business class tickets to my card without asking, and now they were confused about why those charges had been disputed. "Sasha, for 34 p.m. Julian, what's going on? They won't let us check in." "Melina, for 35 p.m. Call me right now. This is embarrassing." "Reina, for 41 p.m. Dude, seriously? You're really gonna do us like this?" And my personal favorite, from Ivana again at 4:52 p.m. "We're stuck at the airport. Everyone's staring. How could you do this to family?" I took a long sip of my beer and crafted my response carefully. Nothing angry, nothing emotional. Just simple, straightforward truth. "What you said." I stayed behind. I hit send and immediately powered off my phone. The silence that followed was absolutely golden. No buzzing, no ringing, no notifications demanding my immediate attention and compliance. Just me, the lake, and the growing realization that I'd just taken back control of my own life. I spent the next hour just sitting there, watching the sun sink lower toward the tree line, replaying the last 2 years in my mind with this new clarity. It was like looking at those optical illusion pictures. Once you see it differently, you can't unsee it. Take Sasha's rent situation, for example. At the time, it seemed like a genuine emergency. Her boyfriend Marcus had been living with her for 8 months, splitting everything 50-50, and then suddenly he was gone, and she couldn't cover his half. She'd called me crying, talking about how she might get evicted, how her credit would be ruined, how she didn't know what she was going to do. So naturally, I stepped up, transferred the money that same night, told her not to worry about paying it back right away, that we were family and family takes care of each other. I felt good about it, like I was being the kind of man my father had raised me to be. But now, looking back with these new eyes, I could see all the details I'd conveniently ignored. Like how Sasha had somehow managed to afford a weekend trip to Miami just 2 weeks after I'd covered her rent. Or how she'd posted Instagram stories from some expensive rooftop bar the same week she was supposedly choosing between rent and groceries. And Marcus? Turns out he didn't just disappear. Sasha had kicked him out after finding out he'd been texting his ex. But she'd kept that little detail to herself when she'd called me for the bailout. Much easier to paint herself as the victim of unexpected circumstances than admit she'd created her own financial crisis. Then there was Arturo's dental work. Another emergency that conveniently happened right when I'd gotten my year-end bonus from the hospital. $3,000 for a procedure that, according to the paperwork I'd briefly glimpsed, had been recommended for over a year. But when Melina had called me at work, sobbing about how her father was in excruciating pain and couldn't afford the treatment, what was I supposed to do? Let the man suffer? Except I'd found out later, much later, that Arturo had been putting off the work not because he couldn't afford it, but because he'd been saving up for a fishing boat. A fishing boat that he'd somehow managed to purchase just 3 months after I'd covered his dental bills. And the Bahamas trip. Jesus, the Bahamas trip. They'd sold it to me as a family bonding experience, a chance for all of us to celebrate Ivana's milestone birthday together. I'd worked myself into the ground to make it happen, picking up every extra shift I could get my hands on, covering everyone's flights, hotels, meals, activities. I'd spent the entire week answering emails and taking calls from the hospital because I couldn't afford to lose any income, watching from the sidelines while they lived it up on my dime. And not once, not fucking once, had any of them acknowledged what I'd sacrificed to make it possible. The worst part wasn't even the money, though. It was the realization that I'd been so starved for appreciation, so desperate to feel valued, that I'd mistaken being used for being loved. But that was over now. I wasn't their safety net anymore. I wasn't their emergency fund or their guilt-free ATM. For the first time in years, I was just Julian. And that felt pretty damn good. 3 days at the cabin had been exactly what my soul needed. 3 days of sleeping until I actually felt rested, eating when I was hungry instead of wolfing down whatever was quick between shifts, and most importantly, 3 days of complete radio silence from the circus that had apparently erupted back home. I'd kept my phone off the entire time, and honestly, it was the most peace I'd felt in years. But all good things have to end, and Monday morning meant I had to head back to reality. The drive home was different this time. Instead of that familiar knot of dread in my stomach, I felt something I hadn't experienced in forever. Calm. Like I'd finally found my backbone again after years of it being surgically removed by guilt trips and manipulation. I pulled into my driveway around 2 in the afternoon, already mentally preparing for whatever shitstorm was waiting for me. The house looked normal from the outside. Same perfectly manicured lawn that our landscaping service maintained, same spotless driveway, same everything. But I could feel the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. I'd barely gotten my duffel bag out of the trunk when I heard car doors slamming behind me. I didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. The sound of designer heels clicking aggressively on asphalt was a dead giveaway. Julian. Melina's voice cut through the afternoon air like a buzzsaw. We need to talk. Right now. I shouldered my bag and headed for the front door without acknowledging them. But of course, they followed me up the walkway like a pack of well-dressed wolves. I got my key in the lock and stepped inside, and that's when they made their move. Melina pushed past me into the foyer, followed by Ivana and Sasha. All 3 of them were wearing matching athleisure outfits. Apparently, coordinated confrontation was a thing now. Their faces were blotchy and red, that particular shade that comes from a combination of crying and righteous indignation. But here's the thing that really got to me. They were all wearing these fake smiles. Like they thought if they just acted sweet enough, I'd magically forget about the $4,000 they'd stolen from me. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, arms crossed, waiting to see what kind of performance they'd put on. Part of me was actually curious about how they were going to try to spin this. "Baby," Melina started, using that voice she usually reserved for when she wanted something expensive. "We were so worried about you. You just disappeared." "We tried calling," Sasha chimed in, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Like 100 times. Ivana nodded along like a bobblehead. "We thought maybe something had happened to you." I just stared at them. The audacity was actually breathtaking. They'd stolen my credit card information, booked themselves a luxury vacation without my knowledge or consent, and now they were standing in my house acting like I was the problem for not being available to clean up their mess. "Where were you?" Melina pressed, taking a step closer. "You had us scared to death." I could see the calculation behind her eyes. She was trying to figure out my angle, trying to determine the best approach to get me back in line. This was classic Melina. When direct manipulation didn't work, she'd switch to emotional manipulation. But I wasn't playing along anymore. I walked past them into the living room and sat down in my recliner, the one piece of furniture in this house that was actually mine. They followed, of course, arranging themselves on the white sectional sofa that Melina had insisted we needed and that I wasn't allowed to sit on in my work clothes. The silence stretched out for a solid minute. They kept glancing at each other, probably trying to telepathically coordinate their next move. Finally, Melina cleared her throat. "Look, there was obviously some kind of misunderstanding about the trip," she said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "We can work this out." "Misunderstanding," I repeated slowly, like I was tasting the word. "That's what we're calling it. The credit card thing was just," Sasha started, but I held up my hand and she actually stopped talking. "When was the last time that it happened?" "No," I said. "We're not doing this. You don't get to stand in my house and gaslight me about what happened." Ivana's fake smile faltered. "Julian, you're being really dramatic about this." "Am I?" I leaned back in my chair, studying their faces. "You charged $4,600 to my credit card without asking. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft. We're family." Sasha burst out, her voice getting shrill. "Family doesn't steal from each other." And there it was, the magic word they always used to justify their behavior. Family. Like that word was some kind of get-out-of-jail-free card that absolved them of basic human decency and respect. "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice deadly calm. "Family doesn't steal from each other. So what does that make you?" The fake smiles disappeared completely now. Melina's face went pale, then flushed red. Ivana looked like she'd been slapped. Sasha's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "I can't believe you're saying that to us," Melina whispered, her voice shaking. "After everything we've been to each other. What have you been to me?" I asked. "Really think about that question, Melina. What have any of you actually been to me besides expensive?" That's when the real masks came off. "You're being a complete asshole," Ivana snapped. "We made one mistake and you're acting like we murdered your dog." "One mistake?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Which one mistake are we talking about?" "The $4,000 you stole last week. The $800 I gave Sasha for rent that she spent on Miami? The $3,000 for your dad's dental work while he was buying a boat?" Their faces told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't expected me to connect the dots. They'd gotten so comfortable with my willingness to be their personal bank that they'd stopped being careful about their lies. "Get out," I said quietly. "Julian," Melina started. "Get out of my house." They didn't move, so I stood up. All three of them actually took a step back. "This is my house," I said, my voice getting louder. "My name is on the deed. My money paid for everything in it. And I'm telling you to leave." For a moment, I thought they might actually argue. But something in my face must have convinced them I was serious, because Melina grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Her sisters followed, muttering under their breath about how unreasonable I was being. Just before they reached the foyer, Melina turned back one last time. "You'll regret this," she said. "When you're sitting here all alone, you'll remember what you gave up." I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman I'd thought I loved, who'd spent 3 years systematically draining me dry, while convincing me it was my privilege to be used. No, I said. I really won't. The door slammed behind them, and for the first time in years, my house felt like home. After they left, I sat in my living room for a solid hour, just processing what had happened. The silence felt different now, not empty or lonely, but clean, like I'd finally aired out a room that had been stuffy for way too long. But as the initial adrenaline rush wore off, something else started building inside me. Not anger exactly, but a cold, calculating clarity that I'd never felt before. They thought this was over. They thought they could just waltz into my house, put on their little performance, and when that didn't work, they could storm out with some dramatic exit line, and everything would go back to normal. They had no idea what normal was about to look like. I walked over to my home office, the little spare bedroom where I paid all the bills and handled all the financial stuff that Melina couldn't be bothered with, and fired up my laptop. If they wanted to treat our relationship like a business transaction, then it was time to make it official. Opening up a spreadsheet felt almost therapeutic. There's something satisfying about organizing chaos into neat little rows and columns, turning years of emotional manipulation into cold, hard numbers. And boy, did I have numbers. I started with the most recent transgression, the Santorini tickets they'd booked without permission, for business class seats at $1,150 each. That was $4,600 right there. But then I remembered the notification from my credit card app. They hadn't just charged the tickets. There were additional fees, seat upgrades, and some kind of travel insurance that pushed the total up to $4,820. But we were just getting started. Next up, Sasha's rent crisis from 6 months ago. I pulled up my bank records and found the transfer, $700, sent at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, because she'd called me sobbing about how her landlord was threatening eviction. $700 that I never saw again, for a crisis that she'd created herself by kicking out her boyfriend in a fit of jealous rage. Then there was Arturo's dental work. I had to dig through my email to find the exact amount because it had been split across 2 payments. The initial emergency visit and then the actual procedure a week later. Total damage, $2,000. $2,000 to fix teeth that he'd been ignoring for over a year while he saved up for his precious fishing boat. But wait, there was more. Reina's laptop from last Christmas. I'd almost forgotten about that one because it had been presented as a gift, not a loan. She'd mentioned at Melina's family Christmas party how her old laptop had died and she couldn't afford a new one for her freelance graphic design work. Being the generous fool that I was, I'd surprised her with a brand new MacBook Pro the next week. $380, which seemed reasonable at the time for helping out a friend who was struggling. Except Reina wasn't struggling. I'd found out later through social media that she'd just bought herself a brand new car. Apparently, her laptop hadn't died. She'd just wanted an upgrade and figured I was stupid enough to pay for it. Spoiler alert, I was. I kept digging through my records, and the hits just kept coming. There was the $150 I'd lent Ivana for her car registration renewal, which she'd never paid back. The $200 dinner bill from Melina's birthday celebration that somehow became my responsibility because you make more money than everyone else. The $75 I'd fronted Sasha for concert tickets that she'd promised to reimburse me for, but conveniently forgot about. And then there were the interest charges and fees that had accumulated because of their latest stunt. The Santorini tickets had pushed my credit card over its limit, triggering a $35 over-limit fee. Plus, the disputed charges had caused some automatic payments to bounce, resulting in another $45 in fees from my bank. And because I'd had to dispute the charges, there was a $25 dispute processing fee from the credit card company. By the time I finished tallying everything up, the number was staggering, $7,900. $7,900. That's what their family love had cost me over the past 2 years. Nearly $8,000 that I'd handed over without question, thinking I was being generous and supportive, while they were laughing behind my back about how easy I was to manipulate. I stared at that number for a long time, letting it sink in. That was more than I'd spent on myself in the past 3 years combined. That was a decent used car. That was a down payment on a vacation home. That was my entire emergency fund, which I'd been slowly rebuilding after previous family emergencies had drained it dry. But now it was time for some accountability. I opened up a new document and created a proper invoice. Not some angry rant or emotional plea, A real, professional-looking bill with line items and dates and amounts. I included everything. The original amounts, late fees, interest charges, even the administrative costs I'd incurred dealing with their mess. At the top, in bold letters, I typed, "Invoice, past due balance." Below that, "Remit payment to Julian Martinez." And then I laid it all out in excruciating detail. Unauthorized travel expenses, Santorini trip, $4,820. Emergency rent assistance, S. Rodriguez, $700. Dental work advance, A. Rodriguez, $2,000. Equipment purchase, R. Lopez, $380. Miscellaneous loans and advances, $425. Banking fees and interest charges, $105. Total amount due, $7,930. At the bottom, I added, payment terms, net 30 days. After 30 days, this account will be referred to a collection agency and reported to credit bureaus. Interest will accrue at 18% APR on any unpaid balance. I saved the document, converted it to PDF, and opened up the family group chat that Melina had created months ago. The same group chat where they'd probably been planning their little Greek getaway while figuring out how to stick me with the bill. I attached the invoice and typed a single message. Please settle your outstanding balance within 30 days. Further unauthorized charges will be treated as fraud and reported to law enforcement. Then I hit send. My phone immediately started buzzing with responses, but I didn't read them. I could see the preview notifications lighting up the screen. Ivana asking if I was serious, Sasha calling me toxic, Melina saying I was ruining the marriage over a misunderstanding. But I didn't open a single one. Instead, I powered off my phone and closed my laptop. For the first time in years, I wasn't interested in their drama, their excuses, or their attempts to make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. They could text and call and scream into the void all they wanted. I was done being their personal ATM. The Bank of Julian was officially closed, and it was about damn time they learned how to manage their own financial lives. The feeling of sending that invoice was better than any drug I'd ever experienced. It was power, dignity, and self-respect all rolled into one beautiful PDF document. And honestly, it felt fucking amazing. The week after I sent the invoice was blissfully quiet. My phone stayed off most of the time, and when I did check it, I'd just delete the increasingly frantic messages without reading them. I was working my regular shifts at the hospital, coming home to a peaceful house, and for the first time in years, I was sleeping through the night without stress dreams about credit card bills and family emergencies. I thought I had a pretty complete picture of how badly I'd been played. Boy, was I wrong. It was Thursday evening, and I'd just gotten home from a relatively calm day in the ER. Only 2 overdoses, 1 heart attack, and a guy who'd somehow managed to get his head stuck in a decorative fence. I was heating up some leftover pizza and actually looking forward to watching a game without anyone complaining about sports being toxic masculinity when my phone buzzed with a message from someone I hadn't heard from in months. Liana Castillo, Sasha's ex-girlfriend. Now, Liana and I had never been what you'd call close. We'd met a handful of times at family gatherings, exchanged maybe 50 words total over the course of their 2-year relationship. She was one of those quiet, observant types who seemed to see everything but said very little. When she and Sasha broke up last fall, I'd assumed that was the end of any connection we might have had. Her message was short and to the point. Hey Julian, I know we don't really know each other, but I think you should see this. Can we talk? Something about the tone made my stomach clench. This wasn't a casual, hey, how's it going message. This was someone reaching out because they had information I needed to hear. I called her back immediately. Julian. Her voice was cautious, like she wasn't entirely sure I'd want to hear what she had to say. Yeah, it's me. What's going on, Liana? There was a pause, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. I've been following what's happening with you and Melina's family. Sasha's been, well, she's been talking. A lot. And some of the things she's saying don't match up with what I know to be true. What do you mean? Can we meet somewhere? This isn't really phone conversation material. I've got some documents you need to see. An hour later, we were sitting in a corner booth at Denny's, because apparently life-changing revelations happen in the most mundane places. Liana had brought a laptop bag and a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. She looked nervous as hell, fidgeting with her coffee cup and avoiding eye contact. "Before I show you this stuff," she said, "I need you to know that I'm not doing this to hurt anyone. But I can't watch you get screwed over anymore when I have information that could help you." "What kind of information?" She opened the laptop and turned it toward me. The screen showed a spreadsheet that looked like something a forensic accountant would create. And that's when I remembered that Liana actually was a forensic accountant for some big firm downtown. This wasn't just casual gossip. This was professional-level financial investigation. "I started putting this together about 6 months ago when Sasha and I were still dating," she explained. "She was always broke, always stressed about money, but her spending habits didn't match her income. So I started tracking things, just out of curiosity at first." The spreadsheet had columns for dates, amounts, sources, and purposes. But what made my blood run cold were the names in the source column, the same name over and over again. "Mine. Julian, they've been systematically milking you for way longer than you realize," Liana said quietly. "And it's not just the obvious stuff you already know about." She scrolled down through the entries, and I felt sicker with each line item. The rent money I'd given Sasha? She'd used part of it for rent, sure, but she'd also bought herself a new iPhone and a weekend spa package. The emergency fund she'd claimed didn't exist? It did exist, and all 3 sisters had been contributing to it, with my money. "See this account here?" Liana pointed to a bank statement on the screen. "This is a joint savings account that Melina, Ivana, and Sasha opened about 18 months ago. They called it their emergency fund, but look at the deposits." I leaned closer to the screen. Every single deposit corresponded to money I'd given one of them for various emergencies. The rent money, the dental work payment, even smaller amounts that I'd forgotten about, $50 here, $100 there, all supposedly for urgent needs that couldn't wait. "They've been pooling your money," Liana continued. "And look what they've been spending it on." The withdrawal history was like a punch to the gut. Spa memberships, designer handbags, a weekend trip to Napa Valley that none of them had mentioned to me, Botox appointments, multiple ones, for Ivana, a personal trainer for Melina, even a down payment on a new car for Sasha, the same car she'd claimed her ex-boyfriend had helped her finance. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, staring at the numbers. "How long has this been going on?" Based on what I could track, at least 2 years, probably longer. Liana pulled out the manila folder and started spreading papers across the table. "These are bank statements, credit card records, social media posts with geotag locations and timestamps." I cross-referenced everything. She showed me screenshots of Instagram posts. Ivana at an expensive restaurant the same week she'd asked me for grocery money. Sasha posing with shopping bags from high-end stores while supposedly struggling to make ends meet. Melina at a luxury day spa getting treatments that cost more than most people's mortgage payments. "They've been living like celebrities on your dime while making you feel guilty for not giving them more," Liana said. "And the worst part? They've been laughing about it." She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of text conversations between the sisters. My hands were shaking as I read them. Sasha to Ivana. "LOL, Julian just sent another $200 for emergency car repairs. Booked my massage for tomorrow, face with tears of joy." Ivana to Melina. "Your husband is so easy. Just cry a little and mention money problems, and he opens his wallet like a trained seal." Melina's response. "I know, right? He actually feels guilty if he doesn't help. It's almost too easy." There were dozens of these messages, spanning months. They'd turned manipulating me into a game, complete with strategies and scorecards. They'd even given me a nickname, ATM, with a bunch of $sign emojis. I sat back in the booth, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it took my breath away. These weren't desperate people making poor choices in tough situations. These were predators who'd identified a mark and systematically bled him dry while congratulating themselves on their cleverness. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked Liana, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because you deserve to know the truth," she said. "And because what they did to you, they'll do to someone else. This isn't about love or family or even desperation. This is about entitlement and exploitation, and it needs to stop." She closed the laptop and started gathering up the papers. "I've made copies of everything. Bank records, screenshots, transaction histories, everything. If you decide to take legal action, you'll have documentation." I looked at this woman who barely knew me, who had nothing to gain by getting involved, who'd spent months quietly documenting evidence of what my own wife and her family had been doing to me. And I realized that in one evening, she'd shown me more loyalty and honesty than I'd gotten from my supposed family in years. "Thank you," I said, and meant it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. "Don't thank me yet," Liana replied. "Wait until you decide what you're going to do with this information. Because once you know the truth, you can't unknow it." She was right about that. As I drove home that night, I knew that whatever happened next, there was no going back to the way things were. The question was, what the hell was I going to do now? 2 days after my meeting with Liana, I was sitting in my apartment. Yeah, I'd moved out of the house and into a small place across town when someone knocked on my door. Not the aggressive pounding I'd gotten used to from Melina and her sisters, but a soft, almost hesitant tapping. I looked through the peephole and saw Arturo standing there in his best khakis and a polo shirt, holding a manila folder against his chest like a shield. Melina's dad, the guy whose dental work I'd paid for while he was secretly buying a fishing boat. He looked smaller than I remembered, older somehow, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult conversations. When I opened the door, he tried to smile, but it came out shaky and uncertain. "Julian, Mijo, can we talk?" Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face. This was the man who'd let his daughters drain me dry while he stood by and watched, probably counting the money he'd saved by letting me pay for his medical expenses. But there was something in his expression, shame, maybe, or genuine regret, that made me step aside and let him in. He shuffled into my small living room, looking around at my second-hand furniture and bare walls. Everything I owned now could fit in a U-Haul truck, and somehow that felt liberating rather than depressing. "This is a nice place," he said, though we both knew it was a lie. It was a basic one-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a kitchen the size of a closet. But it was mine, paid for with my money, no strings attached. "What do you want, Arturo?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. He sat down heavily on my cheap couch and opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were bank statements, receipts, and what looked like a handwritten ledger. His accounting of the damage, I realized. "I want to make this right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what my daughters did to you, what we all did to you, and I'm ashamed." He spread the papers out on my coffee table, and I could see he'd been meticulous in his record-keeping. Every loan, every emergency, every time I'd opened my wallet for his family, it was all there, documented with dates and amounts. "I enabled them," he continued, not meeting my eyes. "I should have stopped it, should have told them to leave you alone. But it was easier to let you pay than to deal with their drama when they didn't get their way." I sat down across from him, studying this man who'd been like a father figure to me for 3 years. Or so I'd thought. Now I could see him clearly. Weak, passive, content to let his daughters manipulate their way through life as long as he didn't have to deal with the consequences. "So what's this?" I gestured to the papers. "Your confession? It's my attempt to salvage what's left of my honor," he said. "And maybe to save my marriage." That caught my attention. "Your marriage?" Arturo nodded, finally looking up at me. "Maria found out. About the boat. About the money you gave us for my teeth. About everything. She's threatening to leave me unless I make this right." So that's what this was really about. Not genuine remorse or family loyalty. Just another crisis that needed to be managed. Another fire that needed to be put out. And naturally, they'd sent the person they thought I'd be most likely to forgive. "She's right to threaten that," I said. "You all used me, Arturo, for years, while pretending to care about me." "We do care about you," he protested, but even he didn't seem to believe it. "No, you don't. You care about what I could provide. There's a difference." He was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with something that might have been genuine emotion. "I'm sorry, Julian. Truly sorry. We took advantage of your good heart, and we were wrong." "Yeah, you were. Can you forgive us? Can we find a way to fix this?" I looked at this broken old man sitting in my living room, begging for absolution that I didn't have the power to give. Even if I could forgive him, and I wasn't sure I could, forgiveness wouldn't undo the years of manipulation and betrayal. It wouldn't give me back the money they'd stolen or the trust they'd shattered. "I can't fix this for you, Arturo," I said finally. "This mess belongs to you and your daughters. You're going to have to figure out how to live with what you've done." He nodded slowly. gathering up his papers with shaking hands. At the door, he turned back one last time. For what it's worth, Julian, you're a good man. Better than we deserved. Yeah, I said. I am. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment and realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. The weeks that followed our churros visit settled into something I hadn't experienced in years, actual peace. No drama, no crisis phone calls, no sudden financial emergencies that somehow became my responsibility. Just quiet mornings with coffee that I bought with my own money, evenings where I could watch whatever I wanted on TV, and nights where I slept straight through without stressed dreams about credit card bills. It was weird at first, honestly. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to show up at my door with another sob story and their handout. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I'd actually broken free from the cycle. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. Simple stuff that most people take for granted. I bought groceries without calculating whether I could afford them after covering someone else's emergency. I went to movies by myself and actually enjoyed them instead of checking my phone every 5 minutes for the next crisis text. I even signed up for a gym membership. Nothing fancy, just a basic place where I could work out some of the tension I'd been carrying around for years. But the biggest change was that I started seeing a therapist. His name was Malik, and he was this calm, soft-spoken guy who had a way of asking questions that made me really think about my answers. At first, I was embarrassed about needing therapy, felt like it was admitting I couldn't handle my own problems. But Malik helped me understand that recognizing you need help is actually a sign of strength, not weakness. You've been carrying emotional weight that wasn't yours to carry, he told me during one of our sessions. It's going to take time to unlearn those patterns and figure out who you are when you're not constantly managing other people's crises. He was right. For so long, I defined myself by how useful I was to other people. I was the problem solver, the emergency fund, the guy who always came through when things got tough. But now that I wasn't playing that role anymore, I had to figure out who Julian actually was underneath all of that. At the hospital, things started changing too. I'd always been friendly with my coworkers, but I kept most of them at arm's length because I was usually too exhausted from dealing with home drama to invest in real friendships. Now, I found myself actually engaging in conversations during breaks, grabbing beers after shifts, and discovering that I actually liked the people I worked with. That's how I really got to know Isabel Martinez, one of the residents who'd been working in our department for about 6 months. She was quiet, observant, and had this way of bringing coffee to people who looked like they needed it most. I'd noticed her before, of course. She was beautiful in that understated way, with dark hair always pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed to see everything. But I'd been too wrapped up in my own mess to really pay attention. It started with her bringing me coffee after a particularly brutal shift. Nothing dramatic, just a simple gesture from someone who'd noticed I looked tired. We started talking, really talking, about work, about life, about everything and nothing. She didn't try to fix me or offer unsolicited advice. She just listened, and somehow that meant more than all the grand gestures and emotional manipulation I'd been used to. "I'm glad you finally picked yourself," she said one evening as we sat in the hospital cafeteria after our shifts. It was such a simple statement, but it hit me right in the chest. For the first time in years, someone saw me as a whole person, not just as a resource to be used. I didn't need her to save me. I'd already done that work myself. But having someone who simply saw me, appreciated me, and respected me, that felt revolutionary. About a month after my conversation with Isabel in the cafeteria, I came home from work to find an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address, no postmark. Someone had hand-delivered it. My stomach clenched as I recognized the handwriting on the front. That perfect, loopy script that Melina had spent hours perfecting in high school because she thought it made her look sophisticated. I stood there in my hallway for a solid 5 minutes, just staring at that envelope like it might explode if I touched it. Part of me wanted to throw it straight in the trash without opening it. I'd worked so hard to build this new life, this peace, and I knew that whatever was inside that envelope was going to disrupt it. But curiosity won out, like it always does. I sat down at my kitchen table and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were 2 things: a handwritten letter that looked like it was about 5 pages long, and a cashier's check made out to me for exactly $7,900. The check was clean, official, no memo line or note attached. Just my name and the amount, like some kind of business transaction. I set it aside and unfolded the letter, already bracing myself for whatever emotional manipulation was coming. It started exactly how I expected it to. Dear Julian, I've had a lot of time to think about everything that happened between us. The usual opening moves in the guilt trip playbook. But as I read further, I realized this wasn't quite the apology I'd been expecting. Don't get me wrong, Melina hit all the right notes. She talked about mistakes and misunderstandings and how things got out of hand. She mentioned how much she missed me, how empty the house felt without me, how she'd realized how much I meant to the family. All the greatest hits from the reconciliation songbook. But there was something missing from every single paragraph: actual accountability. She never once admitted that what they'd done was theft. Never acknowledged the systematic way they'd manipulated and used me. Never took real responsibility for the years of financial and emotional abuse. Instead, she painted it all as some kind of tragic miscommunication. Like I'd just misunderstood their intentions, like they'd never meant to hurt me, like we were all equally responsible for this mess. The last paragraph was the real kicker. We're still family, Julian. Nothing changes that. What we had was real, even if we made mistakes along the way. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us and come home. The door is always open. I read that letter 3 times, looking for even a hint of genuine remorse or understanding of what they'd actually done to me. But it wasn't there. This wasn't an apology, it was a recruitment letter. One last attempt to reel me back in with just enough pseudo-accountability to make me think they'd changed, while carefully avoiding any admission that might hold them legally liable. I looked at the check again. $7,900. The exact amount from my invoice, down to the penny. No interest, no late fees, no acknowledgement of the additional costs their actions had caused me. Just the bare minimum they thought they could get away with to make this problem disappear. I walked over to my refrigerator and pinned the check right next to a sticky note I'd written to myself weeks ago. You don't have to burn yourself to keep others warm. The contrast was perfect. Their attempt to buy their way back into my good graces right next to my reminder of why I'd left in the first place. I didn't cash the check that day, or the next day, or the day after that. It sat there on my fridge for 2 weeks while I thought about what to do with it. Part of me wanted to keep it. After all, it was money they owed me, money I'd earned through years of being their personal ATM. But every time I looked at it, I felt something I didn't like. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of heaviness. Like accepting their money would somehow validate their version of events. Like it would make me complicit in their narrative that this was all just a big misunderstanding that could be fixed with a check. Finally, I knew what I had to do. I endorsed the check and donated every single penny to a financial literacy program for young men navigating toxic relationships. It felt like the perfect fuck you to their attempt at buying my silence. The letter? That went straight into my shredder. Some stories don't deserve to be preserved. 6 months have passed since I donated that check, and I'm sitting here in my new place. Yeah, I moved again, this time to a cozy 2-bedroom townhouse with actual character instead of that sterile apartment. Thinking about how much my life has changed. It's funny how quickly you can rebuild when you're not constantly tearing yourself down to prop other people up. The townhouse isn't much, but it's mine. I picked out every piece of furniture myself, painted the walls colors I actually like, and set up a little home office where I can pay my own bills without dreading what financial emergency might be lurking in my inbox. The best part? My monthly expenses are about half what they used to be when I was subsidizing an entire extended family's lifestyle. Sundays have become my favorite day of the week. Isabel and I have this routine now where we take long walks through the park near her place, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes we cook together afterward. And get this, we split the grocery bill equally. Imagine that. 2 adults sharing expenses like actual partners instead of one person being a walking ATM for the other. She's nothing like Melina. Where Melina was all performance and drama, Isabel is quietly genuine. She pays her own bills, handles her own problems, and when she needs help with something, she asks directly instead of manipulating me into offering. It's such a simple concept, but after years of emotional terrorism, basic honesty feels revolutionary. We haven't talked about marriage or moving in together or any of that heavy stuff. We're just enjoying each other's company without the weight of manufactured crises and financial obligations. For the first time in my adult life, I'm in a relationship where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide. Melina tried to contact me one more time about 3 months ago. Not directly. She got one of her coworkers to reach out on Facebook, saying Melina wanted to clear the air and explain her side of things. I blocked the coworker and moved on with my day. Her sisters attempted something similar a few weeks later through a mutual friend from the hospital. Same response: block and delete. I'm not interested in their explanations, their apologies, or their attempts at closure. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. The old Julian would have felt guilty about cutting them off completely, would have worried about being too harsh, too unforgiving, too cold. But therapy with Malik taught me something important. You don't owe toxic people access to your life, even if they share your DNA or used to share your bed. I'm still the same Julian in a lot of ways. I work hard. I'm kind to people who deserve it, and I'm loyal to those who've earned it. But now I have something I never had before: boundaries. Real ones, not the paper-thin suggestions I used to mistake for limits. When people ask why I walked away from my marriage, and they do ask, because apparently walking away from abuse is still controversial if the abuser is attractive and female, I give them the same answer every time. Because I finally listened when they said stay behind. And for once, I did. The funny thing is, staying behind turned out to be the best decision I ever made. I didn't lose a family when I walked away from them. I found myself. These days, when I look in the mirror, I see someone I actually respect. Someone who values himself enough to demand basic human decency from the people in his life. Someone who understands that love shouldn't cost you your dignity, your financial security, or your peace of mind. I am free, and that freedom? It's worth more than any relationship built on manipulation and exploitation. The door stays closed, and I'm perfectly fine with that.